ended rather abruptly last time in ethics, looking at the question. I think I'd ended with the question along the line of whether or not you felt you could be married to someone besides the person that you're married to. I think I want to come back to that question before we pick up with some new things and begin looking at them. See what our idea is about this whole question. Could you be married to someone, some other Christian, someone else here in the church? Well, if you can't, you're pretty ornery. You're spoiled. I guess what people think, they think of is, well, but my husband and I, or my wife and I, you know, we do certain little things with and around one another that I could never be like I am right now if I was with someone else. Well, that's probably true, but you could never be like you are with her or him right now if you had been with someone else. So it's going to be you. There's always going to be adjustments that have to be made, regardless. You think right now that you just have the perfect spouse, and if you're married to them, praise God, that was God's plan for you, and that's why you ended up with them and not someone else. You said, well, I fell in love with them, and I don't know if I could do that with someone else. Well, if you really are a Christian and you put yourself in the right frame of mind and everything, then just think of this. If you would have met someone else here in the church who showed an interest in you, obviously they'd have a different personality than someone else. But it's not so much the personality, it's how we deal with the personalities. It's how we deal with some of the problems we have to overcome where two people move in with one another, in marriage, of course, and start living the rest of their life together. Because there is not a marriage in the world. You don't marry someone who's your identical twin so that you think exactly the same and there's never a cross word and nary a discouraging word in your relationship. That's impossible. There are no two people have ever moved in together because everyone is different. You know, I was driving down the road just the other day, and this thought came to my mind. We've heard how fingerprints are different and snowflakes are different, and just people in general are different. And I was thinking of people's voices. Why is it that we've got the same apparatus there, and everyone's voice in here is a different type of voice? And only a few people can, to a very good degree, imitate someone else's voice. And only then it's one or two or three or four people. To be able to imitate me, it'd be impossible. It'd be impossible. To imitate my voice, there'd be something you'd miss in what I say. Why is that? What are you laughing for? No one could imitate you either. No one can imitate your old funny pronunciation either. I didn't mean for the joke to be on me. I was just using an illustration there. Everyone looks different. Identical twins are a little bit different in that area. They're much closer to being the same. But again, go to the voices and everything, and the voice is always different. We've got the same apparatus. You could be raised in the same home. Well, you are with your siblings. You're raised in the same home. You speak differently. You speak differently. People are different. So it doesn't matter who you marry, they're going to be different. They're going to be someone who's not like you. They may like you and you them, but they're not like you. They're just not like you. They are not you. They can't be like you. And so what do? You learn to give and take. I've been here, and then they've been there, and then somehow we've been enough to get together in this area. You do that if you don't do that with your current spouse, you've been married probably less than a week, and everything's still peaches and cream, or you've got a terrible marriage. One or the other. If there's not bending and giving and taking and little problem here, and you solve that problem as quickly as possible, and the better and the quicker you solve it, the more mature you are in your relationship, the more mature you are in your marriage. Well, we have to strike out of our mind these false notions of what marriage is. You can find out what it is whenever you get it, and it's too late then. It's too late for some of the people here, and I'm not thinking of anyone in particular, but for the younger people here who are not married, boy, I would have given anything to have some of the teachings that you'll end up having in this class to know. I approach marriage with non-marriage notions and non-marriage ideas. I didn't know what marriage was about. I mean, you hear the little sayings, well, you have to learn to live together, and you think, well, that's pretty easy to do. Well, A skunk and a dog, you can try as much as you want. They just don't fit. They just don't match. They don't go together. I entered with naive notions. Probably you did, unless you went through some good counseling from some mature people in advance. You did not know what marriage was all about. And I guess we could say, regardless of the counseling that you have, you will never know what it's like until you experience it. But, hey, the better the preparation, the better your marriage will be. The sooner you'll get over those, and the more mature spiritually and in every other way you are, the sooner you'll get over those rocky roads. You're going to have those bumps there. But when you're two Christians marrying one another, you're two Spirit-filled Christians, my wife and I had a pretty good start there, but I would rather have had more of a start than that, like all of this teaching that I didn't have. And then you start with all of this teaching, and then you're more mature in this area or more mature in that area. Marriage is a crisis experience, you know. It is. It's a crisis experience. So the better prepared you are whenever you start off in the relationship. What's all the marriage people laughing for? But you know that what I'm telling you is true. And you wish you would have known this like some of these other people are learning this before you tied the knot and swore your vows. I'll never leave you. And you've wanted to leave them many times since then. For many different reasons. And it wasn't poverty and it wasn't sickness. It was incompatibility. So I must be speaking from experience, or how would I know about these things? There is no such thing as the perfect marriage. There's no such thing as that. It's something that you work on and work on and work on. And if you're a good worker, then you get to accomplish things a little faster than others. And even if you're a bad worker, if you've been there 30 or 40 years, probably you've got a halfway decent marriage, even if you're no good as a marriage partner. Just because you got tired of fighting. You just got tired of fighting. So you just give up. And what happens? You have two sweet, agreeable people. Why didn't you start that way? Just give up whenever it's time to fight. I hope I'm answering the question. It's answered in my mind. I like my wife. I would not want to be married to anyone else besides her. There are certain things that we have between us that I could never have with another person. Even if I'd never met her and married someone else. But guess what? I could have had something with them I could never have with her. Because it's still my personality contributing in, but it's only half of mine. She contributes half of hers, and we get something out of that. If I would have married someone else here in this church, it'd still be my half, but it'd be my half tempered with what you contribute, and that would turn our relationship into something different and turn me into something a little bit different than what I am right now. Certainly, I think I could be married to anyone else. If they're Christian, if they will be a good marriage partner, because what is marriage? It is a deliberate commitment to someone. It's not you just fell in love with someone, because those that fall in many times fall out. It may start there, but it's willed and it's deliberate. How would you answer that question? Are you in agreement with me? I don't know if you're in agreement with me or not. Could you be married to someone else? If you couldn't, you're an ornery soul. You're really spoiled in your relationship, because your wife or your husband just lets you get by with everything, and you know no one else would put up with this nonsense here. That's what I mean by that statement there. In other words, you might have to reform and mature yourself before anyone else would have you. Well, that says something about you then, and it says something about your marriage. It's not too good right now. If you know that someone else would require more out of you to be a better person, why don't you give the one that you've given your life to, why don't you give them your best then? Amen. Why know that you're not giving your best in this situation, in this relationship? Swarming here again. People are thinking, makes for good relationships, teaching about biblical love. Praise God. Well, I won't say what I was thinking then. Good old carnal thought, and I won't say that. Praise God. Oh. Well, you don't know what I'm thinking, so I don't know why you're... That's the trouble. That's a pretty good way to tell a joke. Just don't tell it, and then everyone will laugh. Another question that we had briefly raised earlier. That's my answer to that question, because I think I know a little bit of what love is. Love is a deliberate desire. If I was not married to my wife you don't want to just say, I will to like you when you really don't like the person. But I'm saying what love is a will, deliberate desire. If you weren't married, you could find someone that you are compatible with, and still, whether it's someone you're compatible with or not compatible with, and you end up together, if you're going to stay together, you have to determine deliberately and willfully to make it work. That you're going to go through thick and thin together. And hopefully it's basically mostly thin and not too thick. So another question that we asked was, can non-Christians love? Can non-Christians love? I think we know the answer to that. Don't we? First John. Well, let's see what John says then. That will be our answer. 1 John 4:7. Let's let John give us our answer. Can non-Christians love? Now, if you've got what we call one of those half and half Baskin-Robbins marriages where you've got one saved and one unsaved, here's your problem. Here's part of it. Beloved, let us love one another, for love is of God. Love originates with God. And look at this phrase. Everyone that loveth is born of God and knoweth God. Turn it around. And, well, he goes on to turn it around himself. And he that loveth not knoweth not God. These are equal phrases here then. To be a Christian is to be able to love. To be unsaved is to be incapable of loving. Isn't that what this verse? That's not my opinion now. That's what this verse says. Everyone that loveth is born of God. And you can turn it around, and if you're not born of God, if you're not saved, you cannot love. A song that we sing, 1 John 4:7. That's not the only verse. John gives us many proof texts. That's the best one, though. Verse 19 is a proof text. If you take out him, which is not supposed to be there. We love. Who are the we's? Well, he's writing from a Christian point of view. We believers, we disciples. We love. What did I say before? This means we are capable. We have the ability of loving. We love because he first loved us, because we're saved. Because we're saved, we've got the ability. We may not use the ability, but because we're saved, we have the ability to love. Turn it around. If you're not saved, you don't have the ability. Verse 21. This commandment have we from him, that he who loveth God loveth his brother also. Okay, can a non-Christian love God? No, then you can't love your brother. If you can't love God, you can't love your brother. And if you can't love your brother, you can't love God. He reverses those in verses 20 and 21. Earlier in chapter 2, verses 7 through 11. In chapter 2, verses 7 through 11. The whole context is Christian love, and that Christians are the only ones with that ability, born into them as they are born of God. 1 John 2:7, Brethren, I write no new commandment unto you, but an old commandment, which ye had from the beginning. The old commandment is the word which ye have heard from the beginning. Again, a new commandment I write unto you, which thing is true in him and in you, because the darkness is past, and the true light now shineth. He that saith he is in the light, and hateth his brother, is in darkness even until now. He that loveth his brother, can a non-Christian love? He that loveth his brother abideth in the light. Does a non-Christian abide in the light? No. John says he's in darkness until he's saved. So there's another verse. He that loveth his brother abides in the light. You ask yourself, can the non-Christian love his brother? No, he's not in the light. Is the non-Christian in the light? No, therefore he can't love his brother. And there is none occasion of stumbling in him. He that hateth his brother is in darkness, and walketh in darkness, and knoweth not whither he goeth, because the darkness hath blinded his eyes. Does a lost man know where he's going? No. We know where he's going. H-E-L-L. Does he know where he's going? No. I mean, no purpose to life, no final purpose, no eschatological purpose to his life either. chapter 3 and verse 10. You could take almost any verse in 1 John. 1 John 4, 7, and 8 are the clearest verses anywhere in the Bible to answer the question, can a non-Christian love? But we're in chapter 3 now in verse 11. This is the message that ye heard from the beginning, that we should love one another. Okay, it's a Christian message that is given only to believers. It's the message that we Christians are to obey. It's the commandment we Christians are to obey. It doesn't apply to the lost ones. Chapter 4 and verse 11. You could just pick so many verses. Chapter 4 and verse 11. Beloved, if God so loved us, we ought also to love one another. Well, there again, the basis for our love is God's love. No man hath seen God at any time. If we love one another, God dwelleth in us. Does God dwell in the lost man? No. Therefore, he does not love one another. I mean, you can reduce it in any way, any verse, and you'll end up with the same conclusion here. And his love is perfected in us. Hereby know we that we dwell in him, and he in us, because he's given us of his Spirit. We have seen and do testify that the Father sent the Son to be the Savior of the world. Whosoever shall confess that Jesus is the Son of God, God dwelleth in him, and he in God. In chapter 5, beginning with verse 1, whosoever believeth that Jesus is the Christ is born of God. And every one that loveth him that begat, loveth him also that is begotten of him. Okay, the connection is to a believer. Whosoever believeth. For unbelievers, it's not for unbelievers, it's for believers. And this we know, that we love the children of God when we love God and keep his commandments. Lost people can't keep God's commandments. And you can just go through the whole epistle. But remember 1 John 4, 7. Everyone that loveth is born of God. Now that doesn't make you born of God. That's the proof of your being born of God, though. Everyone that loveth is born of God and knoweth God. And he that loveth not knoweth not God. Why? He says, for God is love. And if you don't have love, then you don't have any connection between you and the source of love then. So it's an undeniable proof text in answering the question, can the non-Christian love? He most definitely cannot. Okay, what about you were married whenever you were lost? Did you love one another? No, not in the biblical sense. There was attachment, devotion. And let me say something else here now. Just because God still recognizes the institution of marriage, though, when two people get together, it's just that their marriage doesn't have a Christian foundation then. Obviously not. They're outside of Christ. Their marriage is not controlled and tempered with love. Why? They're outside of the message of the God of love. So just because we say that, no, the non-Christian is not capable of loving, doesn't mean that we ought to go tell everyone, well, your marriage is no good. No, that's not what we mean at all. God recognizes the marriage. If it's relation sexually outside of marriage, then it's fornication, it's adultery. So that keeps in check other types of sin. But that doesn't help the sin of hate and turmoil and bitterness and resentment in the marriage, even when sexually you're not going outside of it. That still doesn't help sin that's still found in that marriage. And it's a sin, of course, basically of unbelief, because you don't believe the record that God has given us of his Son. And if you would believe that, you'd receive the God of love, the Savior of love into your heart, and he'd birth love in you and make you capable of loving other people. There are such things as like, people get along, some people can do it much better, they're more mature, they have a better beginning, whatever, their personality, they can do it better. I'm talking about lost people, keeping a marriage together, where we might say they love one another, but we would be using love in a loose sense, just like you can use the term forgive or so many other things. Yes, they love one another. I'm not advocating you stop using the term. If you've got relatives who are married and not saved and go to them and say, you don't love one another, well, they do in a loose sense. They wouldn't be together probably if they don't love one another, but it's love in a loose sense, because basically everything that the Christian is to do, 1 Corinthians chapter 10, is to be done to the glory of God. The non-Christian cannot do anything that's service to God. It's always service to himself. Even if it's service to another person, it's because of what you get out of it. Intrinsically, somehow, it's because of something you get out of it. And your life is not committed and devoted to God. So that's another way of answering this same question with the same type of answer, the 1 John 4, 7, and 8 answer, can the non-Christian love? No, because anything that even approaches love in his life is never for a God-pleasing reason. It's never for God's glory. What they have is just strummed up by willpower and determination and maybe by good traits of their own personality or whatever that help the people stay together. Okay, another question that we had briefly raised, I'm just trying to answer some of these before we move on, so we kind of know the answers to these, is can a Christian love a non-Christian? And we briefly answered that last time, but I just want to make sure, and I keep saying this to make sure it's clarified, what I mean by you not forgiving a lost person and so forth, not forgiving an unrepentant person. I don't mean anything bad or negative from your point about that. We're just talking about possibility versus impossibility. Most of the scriptures in the New Testament that will be directed to us on the topic of love will be Christian love, and that's what I mean by that is brother to brother. Now, Jesus does quote the Old Testament in saying, love thy neighbor as thyself. He gives us an understanding, I believe it's in Luke 10, of what his concept of neighbor, what is neighbor love versus, enemy hatred. Hate your enemy and love your neighbor. What is neighbor love? He gives us an idea of the concept of neighbor behind the idea of neighbor love. Neighbor love can go beyond just a fellow Christian. It can go beyond just a fellow Christian. But still, you're only going to have part of this definition of love in effect here. Let's look at our definition if you've got that with you again, or I'll read it to you again. You can only have part of this definition. So to answer the question, can you love a lost person? Yes, in one sense. That's what I mean. Not in the mutual sense, but yes, in one sense. Love is the willed, deliberate desire. You can do that to a lost or a saved person. To mutually participate in a lasting relationship, that's what you can't do, because they can't love. That's why we started with the other question, can the lost person love? No, they can't love you in return. Can you participate in a lasting relationship? Yes, you can participate in a lasting relationship with a lost person, controlled by your will, by your deliberations. Therefore, love, not mutual love. Filled with deep devotion and warm affection. I mean, you see, love, it differs in its mode of expression and the capabilities of it depending on the parties involved and the circumstances. But I said the essence of love always remains the same. Just because it's a neighbor and he's lost, you can't hate him. You can't rejoice whenever he's persecuted. Rejoice, you're supposed to rejoice when you're persecuted, not when he's persecuted. Rejoice when something goes wrong for him. Rejoice when he loses his job. Not be kind to him, not help him. And beyond just the deeds and the duties of it, not really have a heart that goes out to that person in what we would call love. To be attached to that individual. It'll never be like Christian love. Christian love will never be like marital love. But the love, the basic underlying sense of love remains the same in all of these cases. Filled with deep devotion and warm affection. It won't probably be quite as deep or quite as warm as for your spouse, your child, your parent, or a Christian brother or sister here in the church. But I can think of lost people that I would say that I love in this sense of it. There's not this mutual Christian thing where it's just, love, like God speaks of it here, where it's you're willing to lay down your life, as it were, for one another. But still, you really have a strong attachment to that person. There's nothing wrong with that at all. You can hate the person. That's anti-God, anti-Christ, anti-Bible. You can't just, I'm going to tolerate the person. The Bible says love your neighbor. That's everyone. Love your neighbor as yourself. Different modes of expression. Controlled by the absolutes of self-sacrifice. Well, see, everything, and we'll point this out more, this will be proven to you as we go through these love teachings, everything in this definition except this concept of being in a mutual participation, everything in this definition will fit from you to a lost person. So again, to answer the question, can you, a Christian, love a lost person? Yes, in a sense. And in the vast majority of the sense. You'll lack the Christian basis from his point of view, which would make it mutual, which would make it as good as it could be. It could be better than what it is now if you're the only saved person in the relationship. You can love the person by willing, deliberating to do it, participate in a lasting relationship. You can be devoted to the person. You can have affection for the person. And your relationship, at least from your point of view, is controlled by the absolutes of self-sacrifice. Now, I think where this would give some people a problem is when they think, but wait a minute, who's that fellow's father? Not natural father, spiritual father. Then how can I love the devil's offspring? Because of just that. It's not the devil. It's the devil's offspring, as Jesus says. And that's only his offspring in one sense in John 8:44. Because in Acts 17, in another sense, they're God's offspring. Because the devil didn't make them. He just controls them spiritually in this life. But they, in the first place, belong to God. That's where it would give people a problem. How can I love a lost person? Because that's just a demonic, a devilish person. They are a person. First of all, they're a person. Secondly, they're controlled by the powers of darkness. What were they first in eternity? They were a person first. Adam and Eve were first of all people before they were influenced by the powers of darkness. So that lost neighbor, that lost employer or employee or whatever is first of all a person. You can't look at them and think, oh, this person's father's the devil and my father's God. And so we hate one another. We're anti one another. We're anti the system of the world in the sense that it draws us away from Christ. James chapter 4 and verse 4. Friends with the world. To be friends with this world is to be enemies with God, remember? But he said world. What does he mean by world? He didn't say to be friends with a lost person in the world. I hear a footnote coming right away. I hear the need of a footnote coming. If you're a Christian and you've got other Christians available around to be friends, I don't see why you would want your chief friends to be anyone beside people of like beliefs. So there's a footnote. Could you have a non-Christian friend? I guess so, but why would you want to spend all your time with them? Unless you're trying to get them converted. And you don't just have to use that as an excuse to be with them, because maybe it's controlled by the absolutes of self-sacrifice. You're wanting to help the person. You're wanting to do something for the person. Maybe that's what's going to lead them to a saving knowledge of the truth. There's a good footnote that's needed here, because I don't have a lot of lost people that I would want to. It'd get old after a while to have a lost person, and you hear their point of view. It's always antichrist, and you love them, but you've got your point of view. That gets old after a while. Whether it's lost relatives or lost whomever, that gets old after a while. It's so much sweeter and better when there's Christian fellowship and Christian company. Okay, so I think we've dealt with those. Questions? 3 questions that we needed to deal with again. Time we've got left, we're going to start into our new aspect of study. I said we'd first of all start just with some introductory messages, remember? I gave you the breakdowns. Then I said that we would get into statistical studies, studies of terminology, studies of the words, the terms, the concepts, of the Greek words for love in the New Testament, which will prepare us for looking at specific passages. We're not going to do a study of any of the Hebrew words since we're studying Christian ethics. But it's very important to start a study in ethics after looking at these introductory messages with several messages, 3 or 4 probably, at all of the Greek terms to get ourselves familiar with that. I think I pointed out before how even the newest Christian has heard of the term agape and things like this, and they're thrown around loosely, and they have various concepts, and sometimes it's various misconceptions they have about certain terms and what they really mean. And so that's what I really want to begin to get into. But before we do that, since I've given you the definition of love now, I think I'll go ahead, since we're going to be on love for so long, and send out your list of virtues with the definitions that I promised I would do for you. And we're going to look at this real quickly. I don't know how much time we'll have left to do statistics. Look at the statistics of the words. Now, you are going to get a little sneak preview of the last 2 virtues. in the last category here. They're already on here and they're already defined. But, well, how many do we have on here? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26. We've covered 27. That's counting love. 27 Christian virtues. And we have 29, so we have 2 more to go. So we'll send these around. You get a copy, and we've just spent, 100 messages probably by the time we're through just looking at these virtues. There's so much material here. Christian virtues. First class, an inner absence of moral defect. We have 4 virtues here. A, purity, inward moral and spiritual cleanliness. Want to end up with one? Save the leftovers somewhere and you can bring them back to me after our service this morning. Inward moral and spiritual cleanliness. Holiness, the separation of one's life unto God. Godliness, pious, reverent devotion toward God. Remember when we were studying these? Righteousness, the ethical state of being correct. Then the second class, virtues which relate to God. Faith, Godward repose of heart and mind, followed by steadfastness of obedience. Hope, confident anticipation.
For the continuation of this message,
Hope, confident anticipation. And remember, most of the time in the New Testament it occurs in an eschatological setting. So here's the eschatological definition. The word itself just means a confident anticipation for anything. You're a person who is filled with hope. You're always happy, you're always confident because you're always anticipating something to happen for you. The eschatological perspective in which the Christian confidently anticipates the fulfillment of all the gospel's promises of future greater blessings.
Hallelujah.
We did a listing of all of those. Be conformed to his righteousness and be given a crown of life and all of the gospel's promises of future greater blessings. You sang that song this morning, Revelation. Things are going to get better for us. They're going to be better in the next life than they are in this life.
Amen. Praise God.
The gospel's promises are future, and they are greater, and they're of blessing. Peace, the third one. Inward, manward, and Godward, soundness of well-being. Peace isn't just peace in the mind. Peace for shalom meant peace in your marriage, peace in your home, peace in your business. It meant soundness of well-being in your whole life. Inward, manward, your relationship to God, to others, and to yourself. The extended definition of peace. Okay, the third class. This reads like a who's who of Bible topics, you know. Virtues which relate to yourself. Joy. The internal spiritual quality of perfect exaltation. Everybody needs to listen to all of these in case you don't have some of these working. You forgot about these. Not connected to positive external circumstances. We said the world's happiness. Happy is a term that's connected generally with that. Joy is a different term. Joy is a deep spiritual term. Happy, you're happy when things are going your way. You're sad when they're not. Not joy. Joy means you're joyful, you're happy all the time. Not connected to positive external circumstances, and which is therefore not transient. Maybe I should have put in there, it's not supposed to be transient. That is, here today and gone tomorrow. Sometimes here and sometimes not. Jesus said that he leaves his peace and he gives us his joy as well. John 16. Self-control, not just with alcohol, food, and sex. Those are the three chief things, remember. That's why we don't give it to you here as temperance, because of what we discussed with that term temperance. Self-control is the decision and power to curb or restrain one's impulses and desires in any area, with reference to the achievement of some more worthy fixed end. For instance, the Apostle Paul does give us an example of sexual, well, he gives us many examples. I'm thinking of one even in marriage, of sexual self-control, although that doesn't really have anything to do with the term itself. It can apply to any area, and that's 1 Corinthians 7:5. Defraud ye not one the other, except it be with consent for a time, that ye may give yourselves to prayer. Okay, put that back into our definition. The decision and power to curb or restrain one's desires, marital desires, with reference to the achievement of some more worthy fixed end. Prayer is a more worthy fixed end than the act of marriage. Now he says, now don't do it until you agree on it, and don't do it indefinitely. Do that for short temporary times, if you even desire to do it at all, or Satan would tempt you for your incontinency. And of course you can find, like in chapter 6, sexual self-control, and that's outside of marriage, where he says, don't give your body to a harlot, because there's a more worthy fixed end to your life, and that is you should serve God. If you're in a single state, serve God as a single person. If you're married, serve God as a married person. So self-control in any area. We think of it as alcohol. We think of it as food relating to that. Gluttony. That's a big area, no doubt about that. But some people can get caught up in anything from hobbies to model airplanes, working on them, to exercise. You just got to do it. You just got to do it. You just got to do it. Self-control. Self-control. You can control yourself. There's nothing you got to do except serve the Lord and please Him. You can control yourself in any area if there's a more worthy fixed end in mind that needs to be accomplished. Contentment. Contentment. The disposition of inner satisfaction over one's present economic lot in life. Now, it's a term, the original term in the New Testament, that specifically relates to finances. And we taught you on this concept. It doesn't mean that you can't better yourself financially. It doesn't mean, furthermore, that you can't desire to better yourself financially. But meanwhile, you are content where you are, knowing that because God is with us, we have everything we need. And of course, we mean that in the final, ultimate sense. God's with you, you have everything that you need. Even if you can't pay your bills, you can't buy food, and you die of starvation, you'll go to heaven. So because you have God, you have everything that you need. Dignity. Something I've been lacking in the last few teachings with some of these jokes that have been slipping out. That character, not exactly. That character exemplified by a mature, serious outlook on life. I guess I have failed in that area. Well, my outlook's pretty serious, whether it's mature or not. It's pretty serious about life. But that doesn't mean to act like you've got one foot in the grave all the time. Gravity, you know. Coupled with worthiness of reverence and respect. Coupled with worthiness of reverence and respect. Dignity. Sound-mindedness. That character of... These were some big ones to ourselves. Joy is a big one. The others are heavyweights, like up in that first class, but those are understood, and those are almost not as hard to violate as some of these in this third class here. You know, you're separated. Your life is to God, so you're a holy person. You're called a saint, comes from the term for holy in the New Testament. But joy, to always have Christian joy, to be able to control yourself, contentment, that's sometimes pretty easy to do, I guess. Sometimes not. Dignity, for some people to be dignified, they have to put on a corset just to be dignified, to remind themselves to be dignified that day. Sound-minded, there's a big one. Sound-minded. The character of evenly fixed sensibility, wherein one through calm collection of thoughts is in full control of all senses. Or do you sometimes, as they say, lose it? That's one thing. That's one thing I can say, and I think my wife can testify to this. That is something I don't ever do. I don't ever lose it. I'm able to keep myself controlled and composed. It doesn't matter what situation I'm in. And maybe I appear more calm on the outside than I am on the inside. At least I can keep controlled on the outside. And I think I do a fairly good job on the inside as well, because here's what I recognize. Here's what I tell myself. If you get in some type of situation and you're tempted to lose your sound-mindedness about what's going on, everything that happens in the world is temporary. This little bad situation that's going on right now that you don't like won't be there tomorrow. It won't be there. Next week, it'll be gone. It'll be gone. That's the chief thing I remind myself of. This is not going to last. I don't care what it is. It is not going to last. Everything in the world changes. Jesus remains the same. Everything else, we included, everything else changes. This little funny situation that you don't like is going to change. If you'll just be quiet and keep your composure, don't lose it, as they say, in this situation, it'll all blow over after a while. Because if you lose it, then you look back next week and you chastise yourself for being so foolish to have lost it. When if you just would have maintained yourself for another hour, another day, another week, that situation would have changed. Are we all ears out there? I'm trying to help all of us. I'm trying to help all of us be better people, more mature, responsible individuals. And those virtues there, especially to me, sound-mindedness. If I had to pick, well, joy's pretty big too. But sound-mindedness in that one, that seems to be so lacking in our current society today. Dignity as well, but if you just get a little older, you're probably just going to pick up dignity just through age. But sound-mindedness, not necessarily at all. That character of evenly fixed sensibility, wherein one through calm collection of thoughts is in full control of all senses. So that is the opposite. If you want to know the vice is lose it. Don't lose it. If you lose it, you're not sound-minded. Some people are just shattered over something. They just go haywire. They can't control themselves, their emotions. You're not sound-minded. You're an unstable person. Okay, in the fourth class, virtues which relate to others. We got 4 categories. The Christian's amicable, friendly, agreeable demeanor. Virtues which relate to others. Number 1, kindness, benevolence of heart and thought. Benevolence of heart and thought toward those undeserving with an inclination to action. Kindness is basically in the heart or the mind, although it will result in action, as we'll see here with our third one. Gentleness, the character of an easy, mild, reconciling disposition. You're a gentle person. Easy, mild, reconciling disposition. Goodness is just the practical outworking of number 1, kindness. Kindness is basically in the heart or thought, and goodness is basically action. It's the practical outworking of the benevolence of your heart, of your thought. In beneficence. Tender-heartedness, the quality of softness of one's whole heart. I think we pointed out there in that teaching how some people say, I've got a little soft spot in my heart. A soft spot. Our whole heart is supposed to be soft. They've got a little soft spot, a little tender spot, where if you can just reach that little corner of their heart, then they'll break down and they'll quit being so cruel to you. They'll break down and be tender with you. Well, we're not supposed to have a tender spot or a little soft spot in our heart, but our whole heart is to be soft and tender. And this is as opposed to callousness. People are so callous in the world. You've read, I'm sure, about the account that keeps coming in the papers and magazines of the model in New York with her face all slashed up.
Yeah.
How can you do that? 100 stitches that it took, the plastic surgeon that put this model back together, just because she wanted her money back from a deposit that her landlord owed her. And he said, I've never trembled or shaken whenever I've stitched someone together. And doctors don't. You're accustomed to that. He said, I never have until this time. He said, this is worse than people I patch up that go through windshields in automobile accidents. What happened? Two guys put her down on the ground and carved her face up with a single-edged razor blade, an inch deep, and carved her face to pieces. She's alive. She's happy. She says, I'm going to go on with life. She has a good outlook on life. How could someone do that? I think my hand would freeze as the razor got down near her face. I think, I'm going to tear this person's face up like with a machete or a chainsaw. Calloused people. You don't deserve to live to do something like that. You just don't deserve. You're not fit to be a human being. Second category under this fourth class, the Christian's lowly state in attitude and action. Attitude, humility. That trait characterized by realistic, lowly thoughts of oneself and his accomplishments. None of us have really done anything. We haven't invented anything. We haven't marched the armies of the world to the greatest battles of history. We haven't sat in any parliaments. We haven't reigned over any countries. We've not climbed Mount Everest. Not too many of us have gone across the English Channel backstroking, I don't think, yet. We haven't stayed underwater like a fish. We haven't done anything. What have you done? Oh, you worked a couple of days here and there in your life. And how much skill did that take? Not too much. You could probably train a chimpanzee to do the work. Humility. We ought to think of ourselves as people. We're people. We're dust. We're not God. The trait characterized by realistic, lowly thoughts of oneself and his accomplishments. In other words, people should think more highly of you than you think of yourself. That's because you know yourself better than people know you. They just see you do these things, they think highly of you. They don't have humble thoughts about you. Hopefully they have humble thoughts about themselves. But you don't have to have a humble thought about someone else. You have to have humble thoughts about yourself. And then meekness is the outworking of humility through lowly actions. Meekness is the acting part in action, and humility is the attitude. The third category here, the Christian's peaceable manner of life. And here's where we found most of our virtues, the Christian's peaceable manner of life. We've been called to peace, to be peacemakers. Mercy, the emotion aroused by contact with an affliction which comes undeservedly on someone else. The feeling that arises from the sight of injustice or misery. Pity, the same as mercy plus an exclamation such as O-H, exclamation point. Remember, these four terms are very similar. Sympathy. Sympathy, that means to suffer with. To suffer in mind and feeling with those who are in distress. And I think a lot of these, some of you are getting more in the church. I know I'm getting more of them just from studying them. Whenever you study them, it's what the teaching ministry is all about in the church, to teach us of these things, to educate us of these things, so we start practicing them more in our life. Otherwise, we don't know what's required of us. Compassion, to have a deep internal feeling and affection for others, but not the same as love, because here's the conclusion, especially for others in need. Those words go together, mercy, pity, sympathy, and compassion of people who have a need in some type of injustice or misery. Long-suffering is long-temperedness or slowness to anger. Forbearance is to bear with or put up with others who are not on your level or at your place spiritually, is to forbear them. Forgiveness, that we spent many messages on. The cancellation of an offender's spiritual debt in a free and gracious manner through confrontation and repentance. So we have the steps. You confront, they repent, you forgive, and it's over with. Love, the will, deliberate desire to mutually participate in a lasting relationship filled with deep devotion and warm affection and controlled by the absolutes of self-sacrifice. And then those last two, the Christian's thorough integrity. Of course, we'll be coming to that later, so I won't even go over that. Okay, let's at least get one term out of our way here. So you can number this 1, and just for the next few studies, we're going to be adding on Roman numeral 1 almost, because we'll have lots of teaching under some of these. Storge, storge, S-T-O-R-G-E, storge. Now, you see, you thought you knew the terms, the phileo terms, erotic terms, and agapao terms. That's the only 3 that you ever hear in love, you know. Well, there's more terms than just those in love. Here's the first one, the chief one that we'd have to begin with anyway, for Greek terms for love. It means natural or family love. It means familial affections. It has specific reference to the family. Now, we're not talking about the Christian family here because it's a Greek term that was on the scene before Christianity was. C.S. Lewis writes much about this term, storge, in his book, The Four Loves. And that's a hard book to find. As a matter of fact, I don't even know where you can find it right now. But, of course, I think we're all familiar with Clive Staples Lewis, C.S. Lewis. And anything written, almost anything written by C.S. Lewis is of utmost importance in the 20th century. He's one of this century's leading Christian apologists, of course. The Chronicles of Narnia, that's another question, that writing. That's for children, of course. But his adult material, like Mere Christianity, Miracles, Screwtape Letters, The Doctrine of Pain, The Four Loves, his book entitled The Four Loves. He writes much about storge. And in my teachings here, by the way, in these Greek terms, I, in some places, will be indebted to C.S. Lewis and his book, The Four Loves. Obviously, he's talking about 4 Greek terms. You know 3 of them, the popular lay ones, and this is the 4th one that he deals with in his book, Storge. How many of you know who C.S. Lewis is? You've heard the name. Everybody. You read from C.S. Lewis? Some of you have. He's a tremendous thinker. A very fine Christian gentleman. Was at one time. I don't know why I'm saying that, except that I guess I'm recommending that you read some of his material. He's a Christian apologist. He thinks about things. He had an incredible mind. He's not a theologian at all. He's a philosopher is what he was. And he wrote books in the area of philosophy, in the philosophy of the Christian religion. You've heard of things like the Screwtape Letters, I'm sure. The Chronicles of Narnia, which are not worth reading. I have read all of them, and they're not worth reading. The Problem of Pain. That's a very interesting book. That gets into the whole question of pain and evil in the universe, the problem of pain. Mere Christianity, very interesting book. Miracles is just the title of a book. He's got some excellent thoughts about miracles. So he's got many books in print. And this is probably one of his lesser-known books, entitled The Four Loves. Okay, it's a good term. Storge is a good term, but it's never used in the New Testament. Now, some related words are, but it is never used in the New Testament. Because whenever they spoke and wrote of love in the New Testament, they generally had something higher in mind. Christian love is more than just familial attachment. But there are some derivatives. Astorgos. Ostorgos. Ostorgos. You see storge in that word. Storgos in that word. Ostorgos. The A in Greek, like it does in English just makes the word turn into its negative form. A theist is one who believes in God. An atheist, put A on the beginning of the word, turns it into its negative form. So, you just turn the word around. We're talking about storge or storgos, means familial affection. This would mean just the opposite. No familial affection then. It appears a couple of times in the New Testament. Storge never does, but two of its derivatives do appear. First of all, we're looking at astorgos. A-S-T-O-R-G-O-S. Astorgos. It is seen in Romans 1:31. And it is seen in 2 Timothy 3:3, where the New American Standard gives unloving. That would be just the reverse of love, would be unloving. The NIV gives heartless. Heartless. Which is more or less a paraphrase. That's really not the translation of the term. You've got to get the reverse of familial affections. But look what the KJV gives. It gives, in my mind's eye, the best phrase. Romans 1:31, there's this list Paul gives us in concluding his first chapter, the epistle to the Romans, of 23 vices. Romans 1:31, without understanding, covenant breakers. Unsociable in the margin is not a good translation. But what we have here is without natural affection. Now that does not mean homosexuality. That's how a lot of lay people interpret a phrase like this when it says without natural affection. Now he's talking about homosexuality up in verse 26 earlier. But since we know what the term is here, without natural affection, what is your relationship in the family? That's just natural, whether it's a Christian family or a non-Christian family. So what he's talking about here when he says without natural affection is the breakdown of the family structure, where parents don't love their children. I think some of you were giving some testimonies about that the other evening after having been somewhere with children. Parents don't love their children, and children don't love their parents. A breakdown of the family structure. He said this is what characterizes lost man, not just in the end times, but throughout all of history. Without natural affection. Too many times it breaks down. No love between parents and children. That's probably telling you something you didn't know about that term.
Amen.
You would think it was homosexuality. And then over in if you thought anything, 2 Timothy 3:3. Same word, astorgos in the Greek, and the same translation in the KJV, and a good one, I believe. It doesn't just mean heartless, because you don't get the natural and you don't get the affection, and you could almost put without natural family affection to make sure you know you're talking about family here. They don't give us that much, but they just give us this phrase with 3 words, without natural affection. The without is a translation of the A to begin the word, the alpha that begins the word. So there's a place. So that's a love term. That's a love term, but it's a negative love term because it is the lack of love there. And another term. Philostorgos. So yeah, so you see the same word here. Storgos. Philostorgos. Philostorgos. It happens to have part of the term, when we'll get later to the phileo term. It's got part of that, or it's got that term attached to the storge term, which gives us a compound. We're going to see, just dozens of compounds here whenever we get to the phileo terms. And here's one of the phileo terms that we don't I might mention again, I may not, but we really don't need to study under the phileo terms. We need to study it here under the storge terms. Philostorgos. It's found only one time in the New Testament, in Romans chapter 12 and verse 10. Romans 12 and verse 10. And it kind of means the same as the other term. It's kind of difficult to make these distinctions between these terms, and we're going to find that to be a problem, or just to be the issue. Whether it's a problem or not, it'll just be the issue with some of these terms. So it means natural affection. It means natural familial affection. And so probably there's really not any distinction. I've not really come across any distinction between that term and just storge itself, even though we have another word added to it to turn it into a compound. Romans 12:10, be kindly affectioned one to another. What does another version give there?
Be devoted to one another, not both yourselves.
Be devoted to one another. It's okay. I guess I like the KJV again here a little better because I like this affectioned business. But you have to know that the word behind this whole phrase, be kindly affectioned, behind the whole phrase there is a family phrase. And we are a family. We are the family of God here. And so he uses a family phrase here. Be kindly affectioned. Have that brotherly hyphen family, because the phileo terms will come from brother terms. Have that brotherly hyphen. And that's family, by the way. That is family if he's your brother. But that brother, family, affection, love, devotion to one another. Then he goes on to mention love specifically, and he's going to mention another form there, and we will cover that little phrase later. So you happen to end up with two love words put together here. So there's some type of distinction, but it's probably only minor. I'm going to stay with what I have in my translation here, and that's be kindly affection to one another, or even with the idea of familial attachment. Now, this word, it's a good word in Greek, philostorgos. It's never used to speak of the relationship between the Father and the Son. It's never used to speak of the relationship between God, the Father, and His children. Now, there's family right there. God the Father, God the Son. Why not use philostorgos or storge? It's never used for God and His children, we His people. The term is not high enough. Why? Well, probably we've already seen our answer in the ostorgos passages, because even family love, even the best of family love, often breaks down. That's what those two negative references were about, Romans 1:31 and 2 Timothy 3:3. Even the best of family relationships can break down. The first love in the New Testament that's the first reference that we have to love between God the Father and God the Son is over in Matthew 3:17. And here the highest Greek term for love is used. And it just happens to coincide with the Father's testimony of the deity of the Son as well. That's in Matthew chapter 3 and verse 17. That's the type of love the Father has for the Son, Jesus Christ. The highest Greek term is used. And it just happens in that passage to coincide with the Father's testimony to His own Son's deity.